So welcome to a session on VCF certifications. I'm going to start by asking how many people already are a VCP? Why are you here? No, yeah, data center's dead. It's now all VCF now. How many people are data center virtualization? How many people are cloud management?
Oh, that's disappointing. Oh, I'll raise my hand. There you go.
How many people are VCAP? Okay, and how many people have both VCAPs? VCIX, sort of. Okay, cool. Okay, it's nothing to do with the slide presentation. That's what I'd asked. Okay, so we're going to talk about the new VVF and VCF certifications. Myself and Catherine have been working on the administration and the architect one for the last 3-4 months now, so we're going to go through a sort of a high-level overview of what they are, and we're going to talk about going to recap on the packaging because it's really important from a certification focus, because if it's VVF, there's only certain things in VVF product compared to VCF, which is slightly more, so slightly easier to look at from that perspective. We're going to recap on the existing framework. We're going to talk about the new framework. We'll talk about how to prepare and what to do when you take them, essentially. Again, happy to take questions. As long as you're not going to ask me what the answers are, that's all good, because personally I can't remember, if I'm honest. I'll try to forget and move on to the next one. Okay, so just by way of introduction, my name is Christopher Lewis and I'm a sort of solutions architect working in the cloud management space in the VCF specialist team. But I have sort of a plethora of knowledge across the entire portfolio. For my sins, I've been working with VMware products for about 20 years. But my chosen sort of expertise is ARIA automation and ARIA operations, so the VCF automation operations stack, essentially. Socials are there if you want to reach out to me, by all means. Reach out to me on Broadcom email if you've got any questions after the session.
Yep. Catherine Skilling. I'm a senior architect in the professional services organisation. I've been with VMware and now Broadcom for 8 years. All of that time in professional services. I don't know if that's good or bad. I came in to do specialism in automation and orchestration, but I came from a data center background, so I do across the VCF stack. But the cloud management is kind of my speciality if I have to pick one.
Fabulous. Okay, so I don't know if anybody's been seeing Twitter recently, but we're not here to talk about VCDX. It's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. I don't know. Really don't know. So that's the only time we're going to mention it.
So for those that aren't certified, why would you look to do it? Why particularly for the VVF and VCF exams? So we've got the key points really. It's about challenging yourself. So the certification doesn't necessarily lead directly to career advancement, but it's a good way to challenge and see what your skill set is. Do you have knowledge across the entire product, or have you got particular weaknesses maybe that you want to strengthen as you go through? So a good way to expand your skills and knowledge as well, particularly around the VCF exams. It does cover more than your traditional data center virtualization exams do, so it's a good opportunity to learn new stuff and then put to the test, give yourself a target to go through rather than just reading about something, maybe play with it in your home lab, etc. as you go along. From a standout point of view, there are limited numbers of people from the show of hands in the room. Not everybody already has VCPs. And when you go to the VCAPs and then the VCIX, the numbers drop drastically. So it does make you stand out from a crowd. It can help make that distinguishing feature between you and your competition if you're going head to head for a particular role or a particular project, or maybe just give you that credibility for a particular piece of advice that you're giving. Is recognition. So in some cases it might be financial recognition, it could be bonuses related. For those of us that work in professional services, at one time we were getting part of our bonus based on certifications, gave you that little bit of emphasis to go and do them. But it's also recognition of what you've actually achieved. So it gives you that output about the journey you've been on as you've gone through and learnt about the product, to then be able to recognise what you've actually achieved at the end of it. And finally, that journey, it is about the growth. So whether you do actually pass the exam, whether you fail the exam, whether it takes you 5 attempts or 1 attempt, you'll grow across that journey. You'll learn more about the products, you'll learn more about yourself, how you learn, how you retain information, and what the best sources are in particular places to go to find that information as well. So multiple reasons, multiple benefits of doing the certifications.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to, as I'm in pre-sales and not post-sales, I get to recap the packaging. So essentially, be mindful from this from a certification perspective. Anything in blue is fair game from a certification perspective, from a VVF, so VMware vSphere Foundation. So that's networking, but only vSphere networking, storage, Enterprise Plus, or ESXi. There is some vSAN in there as well. A vCenter, obviously, virtual machine workloads, a little bit of IaaS control plane or the VMware Kubernetes service, and then our operations. That's where it stops. You won't get any questions on VMC, you won't get any questions on automation, you won't get any questions on network operations, anything on DSM, anything on Tanzu, anything on Avi, because they're not part of the VVF packaging. Okay. Now when we look at VCF, it's again slightly expanded. Don't worry about the Avi, don't worry about the Tanzu platform, don't worry about private AI, it's not in there either. But everything else is fair game from that perspective. I don't think we even cover live recovery, do we?
No, we don't.
So no live recovery either. So anything in the centre that's blue.
It's also worth just pointing out, obviously, though they're in blue and they're potentially included in the exam, that doesn't mean you're going to get the same amount of questions on all of those components. So we're not expecting you to know Data Services Manager, for example, to the same depth that we would expect you to know, for example, the vSphere, the SDDC Manager components. Same goes with the IaaS control plane, the vSphere Supervisor. Yes, you should know, based on the exam blueprint, the topics you're going to potentially get in the exam, but you would typically see less questions on those topics than you would do on the core stack. So can't completely ignore them, but don't think that you have to be a full, level 400 deep expert knowledge in all of those products.
Yeah, I think it's, we did have a pyramid, but we decided not to put that in, but I think you can be fairly certain that this is probably the bulk of the exam, and with a little bit maybe at the top, and everything else is sort of secondary to it, because at the end of the day, that's where most people are. DSM and Tanzu are part of the features and portfolio, but they're not necessarily used by every customer. So we still want you to know about them, still want you to learn about them, but for every one DSM question, there's probably 20 vSphere, vSAN questions. So it's that sort of scale. So, any questions on that? Hopefully that's hopefully the pricing and package, or not necessarily the pricing. Sorry, the packaging is not too much of a surprise. The pricing was different altogether. But is this me or you?
It's me, I think. Yeah. Well, you can tell we prepared for this. We know the slides we're presenting. So what was known as the existing framework, or now the old framework, because we've launched the architect and administrator exams. So this is typically what you'd be familiar with, the idea that you've got the VCTA, the technical associate exams at the bottom, the entry level for people just getting started with the technology. There were recommended courses, but there wasn't a mandatory requirement. We removed that before the acquisition. There's no longer the mandatory training requirement to be able to sit the exams. Next level up, you had the certified professional, the VCP that most people came in as the entry level. Typically a remember and understand type exam. We tested your memory on the core concepts, how many different parts of the documentation was often a phrase, could you remember, did you remember config maximums, could you remember ports, etc. Again, one course was previously required, we lifted that requirement, now it's just recommended that you take those. On top of that, then you had your VCAPs, your Certified Advanced Professionals, and they were split into deploy and design. If you got both, you got the digital badge for the VCIX, the Certified Implementation Expert. And then the very top level was the one that we were only going to mention once, now we're going to mention it twice, the Certified Design Expert, of which was a defense of a design. There was no exam behind it. You can see on the left-hand side the typical roles that they are aimed at. Now, obviously, we've given you the one framework here. This applies across the different tracks that we had. So the DCV, the CMA, the MV for networking. Each of those tracks had a set of exams that went up the scale and level of difficulty and level of expertise that we're expected to have.
Yeah, I mean, what's not shown here, I guess, is there was also specialist badges that sort of sat sort of here-ish, I guess. You know, vSAN specialist, you know, TKG, vSphere on Tanzu specialist, that sort of stuff. So, but so those were still there. But cool. So
the new framework, this is what you're going to see going forwards. So it's simplified. There's no longer DCV, CMA, MV tracks. You now have VVF or VCF as your technology, and you have effectively 3 tracks: your architect, your administrator, and your support. And they're aimed, as the names would suggest, at different personas. So your architect, the people doing the design, like myself, but maybe not touching the keyboard, don't know the product to the same depth, but I understand the decisions that I need to make or advise to a customer to be able to deploy a VCF or a VVF solution. So things like sizing, topologies, maybe some of the key gotchas, the prerequisites, etc. The things that you decide before you go ahead and actually do the deployment. The implement or the administrator exams, the people that are managing and running the platform, hands-on with the keyboard, may not be involved in any of the design, may not necessarily know why you went one topology rather than another, why you went multi-site or stretched cluster, but understand what they need to do inside of the consoles, what each of the different products do to actually maintain and run that service, keep it online. So focus at the people that are hands-on the keyboard. The support, that's a new one. So we're looking here around the troubleshooting aspect. How do you manage the system when things aren't going to plan? How do you capture your logs? How do you, decide whether or not something is healthy? At the moment, the architect exams are live for the VCF exam. The administrator exams are live for both VVF and VCF. Support is about to kick off the development. That line hasn't gone live yet. But essentially, you can see VCF, VVF tracks for the VCP level. What's very new as well is the VCAP level, the expert level. Again, the tracks have gone. There's no design, deploy type exams now. They're all going to be multiple choice and they're more specialist, focused in particular areas. So it's still an expert level. It will still technically have the same difficulty level as a VCAP did before, but it's going to go to multiple choice style questions for the exams like you see with the VCPs. As far as I'm aware at the moment, and that may change, there's going to be no hands-on labs-based exams that you used to get with the deploy. So none of this lab environment, can you solve the problems? And these are designed more as add-ons. So these are your particular knowledge in a focused area, a specialist. You would do your VCP level across either VVF or VCF, depending on what technology you're working with. And then you can add on a specialist badge on top based on your role. You could go for just the design-based exams, you could go for the implement administrator ones, or you could go for the support ones, or you can go for all of them. And essentially, each of the boxes could relate to a single exam. So it's much smaller overall. If you count the number of boxes, number of exams is drastically reducing. The number of certifications is drastically reducing as well. And I believe, don't quote me because I'm not sure it's public and agreed, but the certifications are going to last for longer as well. So you no longer have a yearly badge against them. Linda's holding up 2 fingers, but I've heard 3. So
we forgot to put the disclaimer up.
Yeah, so they're going to last for longer. The exact time period to be confirmed because we've had different information, but it's not going to be a yearly renewal. Yeah, could still be changing, but they're going to last for longer. So you're not going to have to take the exam every single year. You're not going to reset for a training course to renew. It will go back to more the older model when we did a VMware exams. You would get a VCP in vSphere 5. You wouldn't update until you got to vSphere 6 because that was when the exam got refreshed. That was when the new features came out. So as the product cycles become longer between releases, so typically will the exams, because there will be no new features, no new functionality to put into an exam. So it should start to align more closely to the release schedule.
Cool.
Any questions around that before we continue? Yep.
Yeah, I've just got one. So on the existing certifications, let's say you wanted to get be able to implement VCF, and you've already got a vSphere data center virtualization, you've got a vSAN specialist, you've got NSX. How would that translate to the new model? Because obviously there's got to be some form of migration to that. In other words, what is the minimum requirement from the old certifications to be able to get?
For taking a VCP in VVF or VCF, there are no requirements.
Yeah.
So you can take, Dave, right? So Dave did an online training course and then took the VCP.
Yeah.
So there's no prerequisites.
But I guess what I'm asking as well is if you already had those exams.
If you've got
So whether they're going to be
existing
grandfathered,
certifications.
you mean?
I mean, I've seen some badges be issued from Broadcom now, my certification manager.
That's if you're a partner or an end user.
Partner.
Yeah, so the partners are getting grandfathered into
Right.
what's called proven professional and certified
Yeah.
expert. And that happened up until the end of October. As a customer, it stays with the VMware certifications.
Right.
So it's just a case of you would then take the new exam to get a proven professional
Yeah.
in VCF. So you have standalone proven professional
Yeah.
in network virtualization, in data center virtualization, and so those will be standalone there, and then you go ahead and pass that on. Because you have the skills and the knowledge,
Yeah.
having got the three of those,
So you just
you would just take that,
take that one.
yeah, and another badge again.
Right.
So, I mean, I guess what is really important to point out is that if you're already a VCP, DCV, CMA, vSAN, whatever, those skills aren't going to go away just because we've created a new VCP. They may help you get the VCP quicker than anybody else, but it's not going to devalue any of your knowledge or certifications you already got. We're just switching frameworks to be more focused with our go-to-market. Because whereas we had, as Joe said earlier, we had multiple business units, data center, vSphere business unit, a cloud management business unit, a network business unit. Now we have VCF. So we're just realigning, and to a certain extent, those three if you were a VCP, DCV, NSX, and CMA, then you should walk the VCP, VVF, or VCF.
Yeah. But it's a case that you have to take the new exam.
At the moment, that's the information, yes. Whether that changes in the future, I honestly don't know.
Obviously, this is obviously VMUG, and obviously one of the things that gets a lot of people here because they need to do these to get the licenses.
Yes.
Like I've got DCV, NV, I've got the specialist in VCF,
Yeah.
which I did 3 months ago.
Yeah.
Annoyingly.
Well, to be honest,
I've still got to do
yeah, I mean,
a lower exam.
At the moment, yes.
Yeah.
Whether that changes is open for discussion internally. They're working on it as part of the launch of the new framework. They've also got to work on what happens to the existing exams, because at some point, those certifications that we're offering at the moment for 2024 would renew to 2025 in January. But is that happening? Is that stopping? Still to be confirmed. We don't have that information. At least we don't have confirmed information that we can share.
Yeah.
They may look at what you've got currently and say if you've got particular certifications, as Linda said, your grandfather into the program, but we can't confirm that exactly what the requirements will be or what happens.
Everyone's got different scenarios.
Yeah.
But I think it's knowing almost, do I do it to get the
so what
do I hang fire? Because I might not need to. I might not need to spend the money on the licensing. On the exam.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the other thing to consider going forward, I guess, is that currently we have DCV, CMA, and NSX, plus all the specialistic badges. Now, each of those is, 70 to 80 questions. This VCP is one set of 70 questions. So, actually attaining the VCP in VVF, just from or being able to maybe prove that you can do it, if it makes sense from an employer perspective or whatever, it's going to be a lot simpler from that perspective. I take on board the fact that if you've already got them, it's another certification you have to do. But one of the reasons behind this was not only go to market, but actually where we have customers who want to be certified in deploying VCF, but to do that, they had to go on 3 different courses, take 3 different exams, and that just wasn't palatable for the global audience. Now, people who are consultants, contractors, trying to sell their services, that sort of stuff, partners, completely get it. Customers are not interested in taking probably are interested in taking 15 days worth of training, but they're not necessarily going to want to study for 3 separate exams, which they may or may not pass, and have to keep doing them until they do. Whereas now they've just got to take 1, and with no extra course requirement. So that if they've used VCF inside day in, day out for the last couple of months, 3 months, they probably could take the VCP and pass it.
Yeah. And obviously the previous framework, we did allow renewal via training course, but you still had to renew within 12 months, or you then had to sit the exam again. So for customers, people that had to pay for the exam, had to pay for the training, that's a lot of money, a lot of time out of your own pocket. It is different for employees. It may be different for partners where you get the benefits. VMUG Advantage gives you some discounts, which is great, but it's still a cost, and it's still a cost of your time to be able to do that. So it's a simplification that hopefully makes it easier for people, makes it more attractive for people, as well as being easier for us to manage internally, because it means we can refresh the exams more often, we can fix problems more quickly, because there's less of it to go through. At the moment, there's a catalogue that is absolutely huge. You've got to get volunteers to actually write those exams, to review those exams, to then do the standard setting on the exams. It can take months to go from start to finish to do an exam, by which time a new version of the product's come out. When we did the VCF admin exam, we had to write it knowing what 5.2 was coming out with. And that is changing on a regular basis. But the timelines for it meant we couldn't wait until the product was released to then write the exam. And we do it all on a volunteer basis. It's partners, it's people that sign the NDA as customers, and it's employees on top of your day job doing this. So it's not a full-time occupation that you're paid to deliver. So hopefully the new framework works better for everybody. For the people taking the exams, because there's less of them, they have to do it less often, and they are more clearly aligned to your role. And for people writing the exams and managing the exams, it's simpler, it matches our product go-to-market strategy better. The longer refresh cycle means that actually there's more time for SMEs to write better exams, better quality exams that then people want to take as well.
And once you pass don't expire, right? So you've still got those badges, and it's just what gets recognised for your partners going forward. This is where we're focusing.
Good.
Is there a plan for, if you pass the 3 VCAPs, is it going to be like equivalent to the VCIF?
So there's not 3 VCAPs though. So there's a VCF track, a VVF track, and then each of these would be in each level. So there's more than, yeah. So, but if you're asking if there's going to be like a VCIX equivalent, once you've done more than one, or the double VCVX badge or double VCP badge or whatever, there will probably be a double VCP badge, but I'm not too sure if there's going to be any sort of milestone for having more than that. Again, it all comes down to how many people take them, pass them, and how popular they are. Okay, so I just remembered I forgot to update one of these slides, so we'll ignore the fact that the next slide has not been updated. So the VCP VVF administrator exam essentially is all about understanding what VVF is and all the components within it. Some basic installation, configuration and management from that perspective, and then some basic troubleshooting, because obviously there's going to be a troubleshooting VCP. But essentially it's more akin to the data center virtualization. It's basically data center virtualization plus ops, essentially, because that's what the product packaging is. So there's a few questions on ops, there's a few questions on Tanzu, there's a few questions on oh no, no, because VLR's not in there. So yeah, so it's data center virtualization with a couple of extra topics on that one. Ignore it says Cloud Foundation. What I meant was vSphere Foundation on the bump there. But the architects, that's due out. We've just finished doing that one, and that's due out to be released on the 31st of December. So the first scheduled sort of appointments will be in January. But essentially, this is designing a sort of a VVF solution, again based on vSphere, vCenter, vSAN, Ops. There's no SDDC manager, there's no NSX. It's just the sort of the basic VVF package, and the majority of the exam is around making design decisions. As Catherine said, it's about being able to read a scenario and make a decision through the multiple choice on the correct answer based on a design decision or a requirement, or is it a technical requirement, is it a business requirement, is it an assumption, is it a risk, that sort of stuff. So all the design level things that you should be thinking about if you're doing design. I don't think anything else on that one. From a VCF perspective, so the administrator exam is live, so was the VVF administrator. That came out for Barcelona. This one came out for Vegas, and that's all the toys in the toy shop. So SDDC Manager, Cloud Builder, vSphere, vCenter, vSAN, NSX, the ARIA suite. You could have a question on any of that, plus VKS and DSM. And again, it's a administration level exam, so it's about the install, the configure, the manage, a little bit of troubleshooting, but essentially understanding what that sort of packages contain. And again, you're still limited to sort of, I think it's 70 or 80 questions, so there's only so many questions we can ask in that limit as well, so just be mindful of that. And this was the slide that I copied. So this is the architect exam slide from VCF. This came out
Barcelona.
Yeah,
during Expo.
and again, harping on back to what design decision am I making? Why am I making it? What's the justification? What's the classification of the design decision? What's the difference between a risk, an issue, an assumption, a dependency? All the sort of design level characteristics you'd expect an architect to have. It's not. Overall, I don't think it's a very technical exam. There are some sort of, there's no deep, like, if you've only read that once on a document site somewhere, then you'll be able to answer this question. There's no that sort of level. It's very much a architect level exam where you need to have an understanding of the technology, but you don't necessarily have to have had a massive in-depth 6 months on that, doing it hands-on keyboards. It's very much about those business decisions, the technical decisions that you need to make, and then classifying those on sort of like the availability, manageability, performance, recoverability, and security aspects of a design. Anything to add?
Just think about for the VCF exams in particular. Obviously, VCF is a prescribed solution, so there's a set of rules or guardrails around what you can and can't change or can and can't do. The exam is obviously going to focus any questions within those confines. So we're not going to test you on a particular piece of knowledge that we wouldn't recommend in our documentation that you do. So the VCF exams are set within those boundaries of what VMware recommends in its documentation. There is, as part of the exam blueprint, a list of any references that we've used as well. So we can go across any official documentation. That includes blogs, white papers, and the official public documentation. Generally speaking, the latest exams are based almost essentially on the public doc site rather than blogs or white papers. But you may find the occasional one that references it. So just be aware that it isn't restricted just to the public docs. It can go white papers, blogs as well. Yeah,
that's a good point to make actually, because traditionally the old VCPs were based on 70% of them were based on courses, because the courses were a requirement to take the exam. But now there's no requirement to take a course. We can only really base the exam questions on the documentation that's out in the open that can be sort of controlled by us. So you won't typically see any links to any third parties talking about our products, because that blog article could go tomorrow. So it's typically our document sites or knowledge base articles, that sort of stuff that we use for references.
Coming to that in a moment for the next steps, but yeah.
It is you, isn't it?
I believe it is, yeah. So the exams, they are multiple choice. It will tell you how many answers you need to select, and it will force you to select the correct amount before you can submit that answer. So if you've ever done any other vendors' exams and they say select the number of answers that, that select all that apply or select the best answers, that's not how we write them. We're explicit. If you're expected to choose 2 answers, it will tell you twice in the question statement, choose 2, and it will force you to select 2 before you can submit that question then as your answer. They're what's known as analyze and apply level. So what we expect there is it's not about can you regurgitate the documentation. It's can you read or take on board the information from your hands-on knowledge? Can you read a scenario that we give you? So a paragraph, for example, or text in a question might be around sizing. We might give you some bullet points around what the customer environment looks like in terms of number of hosts, number of VMs. Can you analyze that information we give you? Apply your understanding of how maybe you size a solution to then select the answer for the number of hosts that you need for your VCF solution, for example. So a slightly higher level question than just can you remember which port is needed, can you remember which protocol is needed.
Yeah, and typically VCP of old were more leaning towards something we called remember and understand questions. So it's all about, Bloom's taxonomy is what it's based on. As Catherine says, the analyze and apply ones were more towards the VCAP level. So whilst it's not necessarily VCAP, it's, in the olden days, it's moving away from just pure, can I remember the config maximums from the document, or can I remember where this is on the user interface, and more towards applying the knowledge you have to a scenario.
Yeah. And we do try to avoid what maybe comes across as trick questions or double negatives. We aren't trying to write an exam question to see how many people we can trip up. You may get difficult questions. Yes, that sometimes happens, but it is written in a way that we want you to pass the exam. But we need to validate that you have the knowledge and the skills based on the questions we ask. So sometimes they'll be difficult. Sometimes you'll get 1 or 2 lines of text. Sometimes if Chris has written the question, you might get an essay to read through before you select the answer. Any mathematical type questions is Chris. Anything around classifying requirements is probably me. So you know who to beat up between the 2 of us based on your experience. So preparing, so that the question around is there any training recommended? The first place we go to, look at the exam blueprint. That will give you the guide to the exam. It will list any training that is mentioned. It will list the documentation sources that we've used as part of the exam. It will give you the topics. It won't tell you exactly how many questions you're going to get, but it will give you the lower level bullet points of what we've used as a guide when we created the questions. Training, either the vSphere 8 training courses, the design course for the vSphere exam, or the VCF, I think it's called Deploy, Configure, Manage. They're recommended, but they're not mandatory. Depending on your level of experience, your level of comfort, you may just want to skip those. But if you're brand new to the product, it could be a good example to go through for those. Community resources, we put that out there because even though we're doing new exams, the same principles of how to attack an exam, how people have gone through the VCAPs, the VCPs, particularly for the design courses, there's lots of good blog posts out there. There's VCDX video series and VCAP video series on YouTube. I think it's from vSphere 5 days on the V Brown blog site, but the concepts they explain still apply, and it's a really good explanation that you'll find on those videos with examples of how to go through those questions. In terms of studying for the exam, if you're not comfortable to just go ahead and take the exam, you've got the documentation, the publications, and any books that might be out there. Just obviously bear in mind it's the official sources we use for the exam. Finally, practice. If you can, get your hands on example questions. Now, obviously, being brand new exams, there's probably going to be less out there. But again, what used to apply for old VCAPs, while the technical details are different, the skill set of that analyze and apply, how we classify things, still applies. So that's still relevant there. Go through the vSphere VCF design guide, for example. That gives you a lot of information that can then come up as reasons why you might do something. So that logic can then be applied during the exam as well. And brush up on your risk issue constraints and assumptions as well, because you will be tested on those in the exam. Assumptions and constraints, or issues and constraints, are the ones that tend to trip people up.
I think it's also important to realise that the product questions you're going to get asked are on a particular version. Now, we try generically to not ask questions that are based on a particular version, so we might ask a question that's based on something that's in VCF 5.x, or we might say actually if this is a VCF 5.2 exam, the questions are on 5.2. But just be mindful when you're taking courses or reading articles, which version of VCF, and that was sort of like last night when we had the vCorre quiz, you know, it was like, oh, which is the minimum amount for vSAN? It was like the answer on the board was 25, but actually it was 10 because it's been changed, right? So just be mindful of that, that you're looking at the right versions of the products when you're reading documentation. We try not to sort of be too specific, but at the end of the day, we've got to write an exam to a particular version. Just me or you? I can't remember.
I think it's me still. I'm just conscious we're getting short on time, so we'll go through it very quickly. Top tips for the exam. Time isn't so much of an issue as it used to be in the VCAP exams. You get longer, you get less questions. But if you're not comfortable, you can sometimes end up spending way too much time on particular questions. So decide on your approach before you sit the exam. Personally, I go through every single question very quickly, mark those I can answer, mark any that I'm not sure about, mark for review, and then I'll go back and focus my time on those ones next. Any time that's left over at the end, I'll then go through the entire exam and review all of the questions to make sure that I haven't missed anything. Other people will just go through each individual question one after the other because that is their approach. So decide how you're going to do it and stick to that on the day. Review the questions carefully. Okay, so don't add any information into the question. John and I were talking about this beforehand. We'll give you the minimum amount of information that is needed to answer the question. There may be multiple scenarios to answer the question, for example, around how you're going to design for availability, but if we don't tell you a particular key piece of information that you need to use one particular option, it's not the option you need. Okay, so answer the question based on the information that's given. Don't add in from your own experience or think about what you would do personally. Think about what the VMware documentation says you should do, because that is the answer that's being looked for. Time box each question, so don't go down that black hole of spending too long deciding on a particular answer. Maybe less of a problem now it's not a hands-on lab environment, but time box it, set yourself a limit. If you're not certain, move on and come back to it. It's better to answer as many questions as possible, even if it's a guess. The chances of you getting more score and more points that way increases versus spending all your time on 5 questions and then having to rush through the rest of them.
So it's worth saying that when we do the standard settings, we have 30 seconds to answer each question. So we see the question, we have to answer it within 30 questions, then we move on. And we go through like 250 questions, one after the other. So that's sort of the time window you've got to answer the question. And the exam is about 30 seconds, somewhere between 20 and 30 seconds. Even if that's one of my long ones or a short one sentence one, you've still got the same time to do that. So it's definitely a time over sort of quality issue from that perspective. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good. And just the final point, as I say, use that mark for review option, tick that box and go through and review them. If you do finish early, you can go back and review all of them, even after you submit the end of your last question. Your answer, you'll be given the option to go back and review. You can review just selected questions, or you can review all of them. So it's not a one and done. As soon as you click that last answer in, you can't go back. So use that to keep track of anything that you can't answer and come back and look at it again at the end.
So, and the other thing, if you're doing it in person, is make use of that pad and pen. You know, when I leave exams, they have to spend a half an hour wiping out all the stuff I've written over this pad because I'm making notes or trying to draw things or trying to work things out. So that's also useful from that perspective. Okay. Is this me or you? I can't remember.
I think it's you.
Yeah, okay. So we should really colour code the slides.
We should have done.
So you passed. That's great. You know, I'm going to speak to Dave later about taking VCAPs and writing them. But essentially, you know, there is. So from an admin point of view, so if you take the admin exam, the next step logically would be the architect exam, if that's what you want to do. But there is no, oh, you have to have the admin exam before you take the architect exam. You know, there's nothing like that anymore. So if you're doing a VCP admin exam or you're doing VVF, then I would suggest doing VCF, admin and sort of architect. VCAPs, I think we're starting in January, writing those. So if we're involved, that work's happening in January. By all means, you know, it's an ecosystem. So VMware isn't, or VMware by Broadcom isn't the only certifications you can take. I recently took the IC squared cyber certification because it was free. But that was a pretty good free 30-day course and certification. I had to pay for the certification, but the course was free. So by all means, think laterally. Don't just think focused. Write blog posts, you know, share your experiences, you know, build that vExpert brand potentially for licensing, if nothing else. You know, so and I think the vExpert opens in the next week or so. I said, you know, take the set if you can do. You know, everybody likes to collect badges. I think I have 114 at last count. And then finally, if you want to become an SME, then there is a program available for you to register. You have to have had the certification to be able to do the SME program. But as long as you've got the certification or certifications, then you can register to become an SME and you can help the future development as well. But not every SME gets to go into every exam, but you tend to put your name forward and then they sort of have a selection process. But you know, some people fail, and that's I've failed many exams in my time, and that's fine because you only really grow or only really learn when you fail at something. Because if you were successful at everything all the time, that'd be really boring. Could be good, but could be boring. So I mean, the first thing to do when I come out of an exam, if I failed, is I write down every question that I've been asked, whether I knew the answer or not. Because then I go and review that topic. And then I know if I've answered the question right or not. If I know I've answered the question right, then I sort of can ignore it a little bit and carry on with the stuff that I did not get right. So I tend to have a pad of paper or an iPad or whatever in my car when I leave this centre. I sit there for 10 minutes just writing down all the questions I've got, all the topics, all the ones I definitely know I didn't get right, at least. Because that's where I want to concentrate. Because if I can answer all the ones that are easy, then that's great, but I want to be able to concentrate on the stuff that I can't answer, not on the stuff that I can. So, but then reinforce the top, but don't neglect them, so reinforce the stuff that you do know, study the stuff you don't know, practice again, and retry, because really, you know, here's my motivational speak of the day, you only fail if you give up. Sorry? Yeah. My yoga video will be available. So retry. Don't give up. It's because once you've done the exam and once you've got an idea of the sort of questions you're going to get, then I think it makes it slightly easier to do it the second time because you know the sort of questions, you understand what you're going to get asked. There's only so many questions we can write, so many questions we could ask about certain topics. So it makes it easier that more times that you take it. And I know someone took an exam 3 times, and I'm like, well, why did you not pass on the second time? But it took them 3 times, and that's fine because they didn't give up. That was the most important thing, because it's important for your career, your growth, and maybe rewards, as Catherine was alluding to earlier. But what's even more important is to have that VMUG membership and the VCP to get those licenses for you to be able to do more certifications moving forward. And on that bombshell, any questions? Apart from you, Alaric.
Is that one VCP or VCAP, or is that any number going back to your previous try again?
Yep.
Is it an ongoing, you know, if you want to do VVF, VCF and so forth, it's every exam is a 50% discount if you're in an advantage?
I believe so.
Or just one?
I would refer to the VMUG leaders because it's VMUG Advantage that is bringing.
I believe it's
that
because it
discount.
used to be like a 20% discount, I think, and I think they've increased it. I'm just looking at the the asterisk was for something else. Any questions? Yes, Chris.
The small text at the bottom. Which I've always seen this slide or things like this, and it says that you get the 3 years certification, little asterisk.
Yeah.
So it's saying for the second and third years you have a brief refresher exam.
Yeah.
Is that a free thing? Is that like the Microsoft refresher you can book online thing, or is that a...
We'll refer, take VCDX out. Yeah, I don't know, is the honest answer. I only noticed that. Yeah, we worry about that. We worried about that just before Las Vegas this year, 2025. But no, I only saw that yesterday, to be honest.
Yeah.
That small print, so I need to go away and check that.
We can't find a reference to it anywhere else other than in the slide that was provided to us. So we didn't want to take it out because this is how the slide was given to us. But we cannot find, if you go, for example, to the announcement from Explore, it doesn't state about the recertification. It doesn't say for the 3 years. It doesn't say for a 12-month period.
Yeah.
But the honest answer is we don't know at the moment what that's going to look like or where that's coming in from.
I think it's up to 3 years, right? So they launched it with a view for big one, and then case study, I think they'll decide and update in the coming months.
Yeah.
Again, it's about getting out of the school.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, yeah, the honest answer is we're not sure.
I guess that's the issue as well. The exams are on 5.2, but by the time we get to the next year...
Exactly, it'll be 9, yeah. And they are looking in the new year to start refreshing the exams alongside the development of the 9 exams.
Yeah.
Once 9 is fixed in place enough to allow the development to start, because at the moment, as SMEs, even as employees, we couldn't write questions because what we hear daily is changing. And there's no guarantee of what will go into any particular release. As Chris said in his earlier session, it started to be referred to as just 9. It's not 9.0, it's not 9.1, 9.2, because we don't know which features are going to land in which release at the moment. But they will look to refresh the existing exams in the new year on 5.2, the latest versions for those, latest releases for the VVF versions, alongside developing the 9 exams. Again, a bit like Linda said, you know, what happens in kind of 12 months' time with those exams, whether the 5 ones go end of life and 9 takes over, or whether they coexist for a period of time, hasn't been decided yet. Alongside the new framework, things are changing very quickly.
I think I don't think it's a secret, but we'll find out. Should have put my disclaimer slide up. Is that the release cadence of the products is going to be a lot longer. So it's not going to be, you know, for example, our automation, every month you're not going to get a release. You know, 5.2 or 5.2.1 is the latest version of VCF. 9 will be the next version. 9.1 will come at some point afterwards, but whether that's 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, I don't know, but it's not going to be a month.
Yeah, Joe said 9 this morning, yeah.
Okay. If Joe said 9, I'm happy to say 9.
We need to stop though, because everyone needs to go back upstairs for
Cool.
the closing in the raffle. But
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you very
If there are
much.
any other questions, contact us.